All right, sounds good. So as a reminder, each group will give their presentation for approximately 5 minutes. After you're finished with your presentation, we'll open the floor for questions and comments from any of the other groups and from the teaching team. And then at the end of class, if we have time left over, we'll break up into group work where you can do some work within and between your different teams. So I think to start us out, we're going to start with the historical group here.
All right, can everyone see the slides?
Yep, we can see it.
All right, so historical update. All right, so starting with the introduction, I created two timelines. The first of which was an overall summary of all the nuclear treaties, bilateral, multilateral in nature, or international in nature.
Excuse me, I think every person should identify themselves before they begin.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, this is Andrew, Andrew Dong. I worked on the introduction of it and I created two timelines. The first one is the overall overarching timeline since basically the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima to the present day. The second one that I created is a more detailed one looking at the bilateral treaties between the United States and the Soviet Union and Russia, and listed down whenever the dates and data was available, significant dates such as the signing of the documents, ratification, and either whether or not they got ratified or not, and then withdrawn or expired.
Good afternoon. My name is Hugh Simmons. I'm working on the historical group, SALT 1, SALT 2, and the INF. Some of the key points and takeaways we were looking at as the SALT 1 and SALT 2 was the background. What was the background for each of these treaties? SALT 1 and SALT 2, how SALT 2 bleeds kind of into SALT 1. Some initiations. What was initiations for these treaties? Some negotiation processes. The ratification processes for SALT 1 and the potential ratification for SALT 2, but it never did get ratified. And then the ratification for the INF treaty and issues with viability for these treaties and what we think could have possibly made them better. Next slide.
Hi, this is Alex Christensen. So I've been going over START 1 and START 2. So START 1 was one of the most successful arms control treaties ever. And over its lifetime, the US stockpile was reduced by more than threefold. But despite this, there were a lot of difficulties in its early years in its negotiation, which was further exacerbated by the collapse of the Soviet Union. With START 2, there was an even harder negotiations period. It was signed in 1993, just 2 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was the threat of nuclear war was still prevalent to everyone's mind. But over the course of the next decade, this threat became less and less relevant, with the ratification process being drawn out so much, and with the Russian Duma protesting American involvement in attacks against Iraq and Kosovo, and the expansion of NATO. So eventually, while the Russian Duma did ratify the treaty, the American withdrawal from the ABM Treaty in 2002 led to the Russians withdrawing from START 2. So the key takeaways from START 1 and 2 is that the longer a negotiation takes place, the more likely global events have of derailing them. So next slide.
So, hi, I'm Yves Robert, and I've been working on New START treaty, which is highly relevant for what will happen next.
Speak up, please.
Oh, sorry. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. First, the treaty was initiated with a clear common goal of offensive arms reduction between the US and Russia, and took efficiently into account their key positions and points of disagreement during the negotiation process, which led to a quick ratification compared to other
It's hard to hear you. You have to speak up more slowly and loudly and clearly.
Okay. But even in this case, close to be ideal, there have been almost 2 years from the initiation to its ratification, mainly due to the natural delays for signatures and negotiations first, but also due to the usual opposition, even if it was weak in this case. If not extended, the New START treaty then gives a probable lower limit for the new treaty creation time. It also showed the importance that global context had on negotiations, like the North Korean or Iranian questions, which were already influencing the strategy of the US and Russia back then, and that will probably influence it as well in the future. Next slide, please.
Hi, this is Christian Slafani. I'm going to speak briefly about the evolution of the relationship between the US and Russia. There have been various tensions between the two states since the inception of the New START Treaty, especially in 2014, when the US deployed Aegis warships off the coast of Spain as part of a European Missile Defense Initiative. And then again, with Russia's annexation of Crimea. In 2019, both parties withdrew from the INF Treaty. Despite these conflicts, though, the New START Treaty has been an overall success. During this time, communication between the two states increased, inspections and verifications of arms were conducted, and each state has continued to decrease their deployed delivery systems and warheads, as you can see in the table on the right. Lastly, with regard to China, it was a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and despite not being a signatory to any test ban treaties, they have adhered to the test banning treaties very closely, and they continue to maintain a strict no first use of nuclear weapons posture. And I'll hand it off to Andrew.
All right, so looking at the historical context, there are a couple major conclusions that can be made. So first is to ideally draft and enact a new START. However, due to the extended time frame that these treaties typically take, as seen through the timeline, at the very least, like extend New START if a new START is not able to be drafted and enacted in time. Regarding the China question, from the historical context, there does not seem to be a need to involve China if a new START is the path forward. But if there was to be an extension of New START or a prolonged drafting of the treaty, China could be explored to be involved or not. And regarding the current state of the historical group, draft of the final report has already been sent to the logistics and recommendation sub-teams, and we're waiting feedback to see if there's anything else we need to do for them. Any questions?
Thank you, historical team. Any final questions before we move on?
Can I ask what feasibility and desirability, including China, in a post-New START negotiation and treaty?
Michael, I think you cut out in the middle of your question there. Could you possibly repeat?
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
My question is, could the group address what do you think the feasibility and the desirability is of including China in the negotiations and a possible new post-New START treaty?
So in my eyes, the feasibility is very minimal right now. China has not expressed interest in terms of any way, shape, or form of a trilateral New START type of treaty. In terms of wanting to include them, there is some potential exploration. However, the Chinese context has revealed that China has typically followed along with whatever treaties have been out there, despite not necessarily being fully part of every single one of them. So if that holds true, then there's less of a need to include China to said treaties. However, if there is a long time frame or like an extension of New START in which a New START treaty has a lot more years to be drafted up and enacted, it's worth exploring including China, but not necessarily as the main pursuit.
Okay. Anybody else?
Regarding the comment at the bottom for the draft of the final report to be sent to logistics for feedback, we will be providing feedback probably sometime next week for any papers that we receive.
Thank you.
All right, good work, historical team. If there's no other questions, we will move on to the strategic group next.
All right, hi everybody. I'm Maddie, Madeline. If you want to introduce yourselves too.
My name is Ivo.
I'm Theodore.
Ben Hicks.
Max Wallace.
All right, and we are the military strategy group. Next slide, please. We want to sort of restate our focus. Our group will present and deliver summaries of key positions and questions of strategic interest related to the expiration of the New START Treaty. Next slide. And we have done so in groups based on these questions, which my peers will present to you. Some of the more important ones are whether or not there are any shortcomings with the New START Treaty, whether or not we include China as a third party, and what potential developments in future military technology will ultimately impact the treaty. Take it away, Ben.
So in the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review, the U.S. has maintained that they are committed to the elimination of all types of WMDs, nuclear, chemical, biological, etc. Russia and China have built their arsenals, whereas the U.S. has maintained that they're committed to reducing their arsenal and have publicly stated many times, including in this review, that they do not view China or Russia as adversaries and do not seek any type of adversarial relations. There are several stated goals on the US's continued strategic reliance on nuclear weapons deterrence, and that is to deter nuclear and non-nuclear threats, assure allies and partners, achieve US objectives if deterrence fails, and the capacity to hedge against an uncertain future. Again, those are all reasons why the US is still maintaining a nuclear force while they move towards a non-nuclear weapons future.
In terms of the Russian perspective on military planning, so in short, there is a mutual sense of distrust between the US and Russia. The US, the posture review characterized Russian strategy is to escalate to de-escalate. However, the Russians deny that, and they see that any international treaties, NATO and US are intended to weaken Russia. Secondly, Russia is almost nearing its completion toward modernizing its nuclear triad. And then lastly, Russia is focusing more in a hybrid war strategy. One example is the conflict in Ukraine. And the number of undeployed nuclear warheads are increases. And they're also looking at low-yield nuclear weapon. Next slide.
Hi, I'm Theodore. I'm going to continue talking about China. So based on some of the historical baggages in China, China is basically not incentivized to reduce its arms capabilities. So if you talk about Taiwan and Hong Kong, for example, these are territorial disputes. US has been sailing in Taiwanese waters, and US supports Hong Kong protests. And in fact, Hong Kong carries even more baggage because it was the way it was ceded to the British Empire back in 1842 was due to the Opium War, and it was viewed as a humiliation of China by the West. So any attempt to reduce China's military capability will be seen as can be seen as an attempt on by the West to reduce China's dignity or and its place in the world. And then there's this whole trade war going on, and the whole thing about expulsion of journalists which has been happening in the past few months. So there are sour relations in addition to the historical baggage and the military tensions. And there's this whole COVID-19 blame game, which is not helping with any form of cooperation between China and the US. So China wants parity in its nuclear matters to return to the so-called former glory of its 1,000-year-old empire, and doesn't tend to want to allow inspection of weapons. All these factors point to a very low likelihood of China wanting to participate in any arms reduction treaty. So yeah, next slide.
One of the other questions we were tasked with reviewing was whether or not America has lost its credibility in light of recent decisions and recent movements. So we can start with some of the decisions that happened under Obama with the Ukrainian Crimean insurrection and the Syrian Red Line. And then if we move to the next slide, we can start out with some of the recent developments under the current administration. We have some of the greatest hits on the left, but then we also can't ignore the impact of America First policies, the JCPOA, the Paris Climate Agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and lastly, the recent news come about of the Open Skies Treaty and the effects that that's had about our international credibility and our positioning. And I think it's mostly summed up by a quote from Malcolm Turnbull in his recent memoir. In fact, under Trump, America seeks less influence, not least by rejecting many of the global institutions created by the US after the Second World War. And so we have to realize that that's going to create some strategic problems going forward with the treaty extension. And now to Maddie for our conclusions.
So in summary, we have 3 prime conclusions from our discussions and investigations as a group. Firstly, we support extending New START because this provides us with time for technological innovation, as well as promoting friendliness with Russia, which we can leverage in future deals. Second, we don't want to bring China into the New START treaty because they have fewer weapons, they aren't willing, and we need additional leverage before we can involve them. And finally, we believe that future types of war will require a different agreement. So because we intend the extension of New START to be a sort of something to extend the time we have to develop and to modernize our weapons force, we also believe that there is a potential for hybrid conflicts with multiple types of weapons of mass destruction, for example, bioweapons and cyber warfare with hacking and supercomputers. So because Russia is striving for a great power conflict and China is trying to catch up, we really do need time to develop a different agreement for the future. So feel free to ask us any questions now.
Great. Any questions from the students?
Going to have to take the wonderful silence as a no.
Thank you, everyone.
Good work, strategic team. If there's no other questions, we'll move on to the economic diplomatic team.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, this is Lorenzo Vergari from the Economics and Diplomatics team. So we wanted to start to give you a brief methodology of what we've done so far and the sources we adopted. And then we will go in detail on some of the key findings of our research that are inspiring our conclusion, and we will delineate a path forward after that. So starting from the methodology, as we mentioned in the first meeting, we split our group in 5 sub-teams. They are divided in 2 major categories. One category of people that are investigating the economic realm of the analysis, and the other part of the group that is investigating the diplomatic side of the things. And we are split into 3 main categories in terms of topics that are investigated. So we have a sub-team that is focusing on the implications of renewing the treaty. Another sub-team that is focusing on the implication of not renewing the treaty. And finally, the last person that is studying the consequences of bringing new parties within the treaty. And we are looking at many different types of analysis and sources. Just to cite some of examples, we have congressional budget offices, national budgets from the United States, Russia, and where available, China. And also we are crossing data from number of weapons and defense budgets in historical terms. And we are looking for literature that describes the posture for China and Russia. Now we will try to give you some insights on the research in each one of the sub-teams, and we will try to give you an insight on the final conclusion we will work on after that. So, let's go on.
Hello, this is Tatiana Tierra-Ferez. I was looking into the New START treaty renewal, and in regards of this, our key findings are that the recent modernized Russian weapons that are in concern for the US and want to include it in a possible New START treaty renewal, such as the Sarmat ICBM, can be part of the renewal as it is now, which is something that the Russian officials have recently declared on the end of 2019. Also, the New START treaty expiration will mean that no major treaty is in place between Russia and the US, and that can lead to an arms race and further friction of the relationship between the two countries. And our next steps is to verify further the Russian and US incentives on their approach to the New START treaty renewal, which is due to expire soon. All the alignments that need to be done is consult the strategic team to verify these incentives of the Russian and the US, and also consult the technical team on how new weapons can change the balance in the treaty renewal.
Hi everyone, my name is Juhi. So for the renewal, some of our economic key findings are that the US is expected to spend $494 billion in the next 10 years. $234 billion is allotted to strategic weapons of this 494. And the current national technical means cost upwards of $9.8 billion. So investments have already been made for the upcoming decade. The weapons number reduction has a limited economic impact in that it doesn't really change the cost since this has already been established for the next 10 years. Trends in treaties, when we're studying the treaties from the past, show that large reductions in the number of weapons only lead to subproportional cost savings. What we're doing next is incorporating research on the Russian nuclear weapons budget for the upcoming decade to investigate their perspective and see how it affects them, and also incorporating the cost of the Russian national technical means to evaluate their standpoint also. How does this cost compare to that of the US? So alignments we need to make for this week is we're going to consult with the strategic team to analyze values and estimations, including the budget for the next 10 years. And we're going to consult with the technical team to evaluate the methodologies used to arrive at our current weapon estimations, the trends that we've observed in our treaties, inflation rates that we've used, etc.
This is Rithika, and I looked at like the diplomatic side of not renewing the New START treaty and what incentives there might be on that end. I think that the biggest barrier in sorts to not renewing New START would be the idea that despite this agreement being placed, Russia and the United States, as well as other countries across the globe, continue to be developing their nuclear arsenal and modernizing their arsenal, still within the bounds of the agreement, but that doesn't necessarily fit into the whole intent and mission of the agreement, which is like nuclear proliferation. And then beyond that, there have been concerns that by renewing New START, it essentially disincentivizes the potential for a larger and more cohesive agreement, which can include multiple countries beyond Russia and the United States, which may in fact be like a setback to some of those goals. And kind of going forward, what to look into is recently the US withdrew from the INF treaty. So look more into like the reasoning behind that and the precedent that was set behind it in terms of like going forward into nuclear agreements in the future. And then also just negative implications on US presence for not keeping up with the nuclear modernization of China, which will be touched upon later in this presentation. And just alignments going forward is kind of consulting with the technical team to look into more specifics of like this arsenal development and arsenal modernization despite New START.
This is Lorenzo Vergari again. So when we study the economic implications that might derive by not renewing the New START treaty, we saw that there is a significant increase of costs due to an increase of weapons. We expect that not renewing the treaty could change the perspective from a strategic point of view and could cause an increase in arsenal size. We still have to understand what is the planned probable increase in strategic arsenal size in case the treaty is not renewed. And for that, we will discuss after that with the strategic team. But just to give a ballpark number, a 10% increase in the arsenal size would lead to more than 50 billion in 10 years of additional defense budget requirements. We also included in our analysis some costs that are related to nuclear, non-weapons, but let's say peaceful nuclear use. So we focus on the exports of the United States towards Russia, Baltic countries, and other philo-Russian countries, because we expect that if the treaty is not renewed, some of these earnings from the United States might be lost due to the loss of diplomatic peace and climate between these two parties. And what to do next? So we will study the Russian incentives in increasing the nuclear defense costs, which, as we thought, is the natural consequence of not renewing the treaty. And we will also see, in the light of COVID-19, what is the willingness of countries to spend more on their budgets. And next.
Hi, I'm Christian Murray, and I'll be discussing the involvement of China and potentially other third-party countries in the New START deal. So firstly, one of the key findings is that the inclusion of China and other states can disrupt regional stability, and that can be through a plethora of different ways, because we can see things like reduced nuclear arms force that could ultimately just change the balance of power. For example, if China were to reduce their nuclear arms force, you could see other Indo-Pacific countries increasing their influence on the region. Secondly, there are very few incentives to include other states in the treaty. As with a lower arsenal size, it's very likely that we completely remove their deterrence capabilities, or we would have to significantly reduce the United States and Russia's arsenals, or formally approve the expansion of smaller states' nuclear arsenals. Some of the next steps are going to be more exactly identifying costs associated with inspection processes if we include other states, instead of just taking kind of a linear approach and assuming for every increased state it's going to cost the same amount. Similarly, we are going to have to look into how increasing or decreasing nuclear arsenals as a condition of joining the treaty for other states is going to affect their budgets. And lastly, I'm going to need to check in with the strategic team to determine what an appropriate size arsenal for legitimate deterrence would be, and the technical team to identify any cheaper ways to perform inspections, as well as to see if there's any developing nuclear technology that we could leverage to incentivize other states to join the treaty.
This is Rithika again. So kind of just summarizing everything and looking at our timeline going forward for the next 2 weeks. We're pretty much finalized, but continuing to finalize our report, which is like the added details that we've mentioned in the presentation, and reaching out and confirming with the other groups to ensure like the proper transitions within the report, and then continuing to work with the recommendations and logistics team to detail and support our final recommendations. So looking at our final conclusions, we're definitely in support of renewing New START despite some of the other obstacles that we touched on, but kind of consulting with all the other sources and documentations and finalizing these conclusions within the next week or so to get ready for the presentation coming up.
Thank you, technical team. Any questions?
I have a question for Juhi. This is Sam Harrishoe with the technical team. Regarding the START renewal economic highlights, it was stated in one of the slides that the U.S. is expected to spend $494 billion in the next 10 years, 230 or so of which is for strategic weapons. I was wondering what the other major costs are, to the best of your memory, not meaning to put you on the spot here. I'm just curious if there were any other major costs up there in height with strategic weapons.
I can take your answer if you want, or if you want to go, Julie. Go ahead.
Yeah, I could take it. So I actually have the breakdown. So of the 234, I actually have the breakdown for what types of weapons, but like 15 billion is going to be for the delivery systems, for tactical delivery systems and weapons. Then for the DOE's nuclear weapons labs and their supporting activities, the DoD's command control, communications, and early warning systems. And then also it breaks it down into, like I mentioned, it breaks it down into what exact weapon for the combination for the 234. And I can definitely share this information with you in text so you can have it.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
I have a quick comment on strategy team and the economic and the diplomatic teams. So for strategic and military team, how do you estimate the possibility of incorporating high glide vehicles into the existing New START terms and format? Or do we need to include such a new types of weapon in the bilateral arms control treaty between the United States and Russia Federation? And for economics and diplomacy team. So you briefly mentioned the possible impact of COVID-19 on both countries. So I think this is gonna be could be a game changer in this business. I mean, both countries are spending a lot of money for stimulating their economy, and so they might expect they might do not want to spend more money on like a military acquisition or spending more on nuclear buildups, but rather than they might want to save money from such the maintenance of military forces. So this could be a big incentives and a motivation driving factor of renewal of the New START. So you may flesh out such a potential impact of COVID-19 on the possibility of the renewal.
Mansuk? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. That's exactly the kind of argument we were planning to make, because our analysis shows that not renewing the treaty would lead to a significant cost increase, and it would be significant in all kinds of scenarios, and even more now that all the economies have been put into great danger because of the COVID-19 situation. So this is, yes, an additional argument that goes in favor of the conclusion we were expecting to draw. But thank you for your comment, yes.
Great, thank you.
And in terms of the HGV weapon, in December of 2019, President Putin said that this kind of weapon is going to be easily implemented in the New START treaty renewal because of its characteristics. And the rest of the weapons that Russia is currently developing are not going to be implemented till after the New START treaty renewal is expired, which is 2027. So I don't really expect that should be a problem for the treaty renewal in terms of including this kind of weapons Russia is developing right now.
Thank you.
This is Max Wall, technical team. Tatiana is absolutely right. But from the military standpoint, we should point out that these things are so expensive and currently only developed in single digits because of the ceramics and all of the materials technology for reentry, that it's unlikely that they're going to have a large part of strategic arsenal. And because they're unpowered, they're very likely already covered under the treaty as it exists.
All right, if there's no other questions, thank you, Economic and Diplomatic team. We'll move on to the technical team next.
Okay. Hello, everybody. We're the technical group. We'll start off with James.
Hey, everyone. I'm James Parks. So for the technical group, we've broken it down as we outlined in our first presentation into first analyzing our current treaty, what the historical pros and cons of it are, what it's looking like going forward, and then putting this in light of the technical capabilities of each of the countries. What I've been particularly focusing on is understanding our current treaty by doing a thorough analysis of our treaty. What's limited, what's not limited, understanding what the effectiveness of the treaty is at the goals that the treaty outlines in the treaty's preamble. And then investigating, as I just mentioned before, the common support and criticisms. Also, just for point of reference, you can see from the Arms Control Association on the right, just one bit of data that we'll be including in our presentation, or in our presentation and in our write-up, that we have in fact already met the limits and actually exceeded in the decreasing beyond the limits of the New START Treaty as of February 2018, as the treaty specified. As far as how this is going forward, really the research portion of this part of our analysis has been completed, and I'm currently working on writing this part up as the beginning of the technical section. Thank you.
Hi, this is Ravati Tate. So I primarily focused on doing research into the US's military capability. This involved compiling numbers of existing nuclear weapons and delivery systems currently in US possession, including the locations of existing weapons. So looking at where they're stored both domestically and abroad. Several locations in Europe, such as Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. Also looking at modernization programs of existing weapons. Like previous teams have noted, our nuclear arsenal is aging and in need of repairs. So there are a lot of programs working on updating delivery systems, specifically looking at ICBMs, air-launched cruise missiles, and bombers. And also from a policy standpoint, I looked at the 2018 NPR and identified primary motives for the US, such as the US wanting a stable relationship with both China and Russia, expanding the arsenal to include low-yield weapons to help with providing credible deterrence, and also indicating to adversaries that there are no benefits from non-nuclear aggression. Yep.
Hello, I'm Richie. I analyzed the Russian military capabilities. So Russia has begun their modernization program since 1990s. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, they were plagued by financial issues. So a lot of the technology that was being developed then is starting to pop up now in 2020 and going up until the 2030s. So I've looked into their strategic weapons. For an example, you can see below their old KH-55 missile with their payload and range is being replaced by the KH-102. So this is just an example of their air-launched cruise missiles. I've done this for the ICBMs and SLBNs. But the main issue that I found from technical perspective with Russia was their non-strategic weapons. Russia has been developing these low-yield, low-range weapons, which are not covered under the New START Treaty, and they are continuing to look to improve their capabilities. So increasing the range, but not hitting the New START limit, lowering the yields so that they can more readily be used, and increasing their accuracy. The information on these types of weapons are extremely limited because they are not covered under the New START Treaty. Russia does not need to be transparent at all with the US. So most of the information on these weapons are speculation. I've also spent time on the ABM systems. So Russia's current ABM system is somewhat dated. They're relying on early detection radars, which continuously get updated, but the interceptors themselves are currently being upgraded, looking into how they will upgrade their ABM system around Moscow in the recent future. And in terms of the report, I've almost finished including all of my findings in there. It's in the Google Drive if you want to look at that.
Hi, I'm Massimo. I've been in charge of the finding info about the Chinese nuclear capability. Mostly, I've been looking into the current Chinese nuclear systems, looking at things like their land-based ICBMs and missiles, of which they have a lot, their sea-based SLBM, and their one submarine that they have. I was surprised to find that the Chinese did not currently have a nuclear triad. So I began looking into some of their future developments to see if they were building air-based systems, and they are. They're currently developing one ALBM as well as testing a long-range strategic bomber to go with that. Also, the Chinese are heavily investing in modernizing their stockpile. They're building new extremely long-range ICBMs as well as new SLBMs and an entirely new type of submarine that they're hoping to deploy soon.
Sorry for interjection. What does ALBM mean? Air launched ballistic missile?
Yeah, air launched ballistic missile.
Really?
Are we good?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I might have meant ALCM. Might have been a mistake on my part. But ultimately, I've found it hard to find any details about the current or future Chinese technology. That could just be down to the language barrier, but ultimately it's very hard to find any info on them online about what they have, such as locations about where things are, the details about the ranges and stuff like that. There's just not a whole lot I can find. Go next slide.
Hi, I'm Sam, and what I've been working on is using the rest of my group's input and also doing my own legwork to form recommendations. A few of which are summarized here. Chiefly is to extend the treaty to include China. Secondly is extending the treaty to include tactical nuclear weapons that were not originally covered in the START treaty. A big motivator behind this is an imbalance in tactical weapon arsenals amongst the countries, or that might also be an obstacle to implementing that. And then the third recommendation is to ensure the treaty includes new technology, especially when looking at Russia's modernization efforts. Oftentimes the lines between different weapon systems are blurred and don't fit well into traditional categories that were used in older treaties. And in the report and final presentation, I will go into more detail around the technical aspects or technical motivations that contribute to each country's stance with these recommendations. And I think I'm the last person, so I guess I'll open up to questions.
Thank you, technical team. Anybody have any questions?
I'm sorry. I'm curious whether the current New START treaty differentiate the tactical and strategic nuclear weapons.
Yeah, so
Can you clarify?
So it's kind of a blur. Non-strategic weapons usually include theater or so basically the range of the missile is the main indicator of whether it's considered tactical or non-strategic, which are kind of used interchangeably, or a strategic weapon. Many of the weapons that Russia is developing have ranges below 3,000 kilometers, which are not covered under the New START treaty. But still, it is like a point of contention, as Sam mentioned. The lines are kind of blurred, and there has been an issue with Russia creating an ICBM, which a little bit too much range, that they do not consider to be covered under the New START treaty, but the U.S. had. So that has been a point of contention.
Okay, great.
Hi,
So
this is James.
yeah.
I was just going to follow up on that a bit, and that the New START Treaty specifically outlines anything termed ICBM, SLBM, and
heavy bombers.
And heavy bombers, exactly. So those are it doesn't actually specifically in the treaty define strategic versus tactical. These are more definitions that we use for convenience to refer to the triad of intercontinental range items. But it does, for any particular weapon, if there's contention as to whether or not it is to be included in one of these three categories, it has a mechanism for to appeal to the bilateral BCC. I'm blanking on the middle on what the C stands for, something commission. But that's a mechanism for you to either one of the parties to appeal the technology that another party is proposing in order to determine whether or not it falls under the New START Treaty limits.
This is Hivo. I also have another question. If you were to extend the treaty to include technical nuclear weapons, aren't you afraid that they're going to ask you to include ABM as well? Or maybe the ABM discussion is going to be brought back if we include tactical nuclear weapons.
So
this is. Oh, sorry.
You can talk if you want.
Okay. This is James again. I do think that is a potential concern. That being said, the New START Treaty does specifically in its wording say that it does not cover ABM systems. So in order to bring up the discussion of ABM systems, you would have to actually specifically address that portion, which says that it does not. So that's just an additional part of the treaty that would have to be rewritten rather than just including additional points of what is covered and what is not. You would actually have to scratch a particular part of the treaty.
This is Michael Nacht again. Speaking to the point about a new ABM treaty, remember that in the last go-around back in the early 70s, whether it's relevant or not, I'm not sure, but the offensive systems and the defensive systems were separated. The offensive systems in SALT I were in an interim agreement. The defensive systems were in a treaty. And of course, we know the defensive systems, the ABM treaty lasted 30 years. The interim agreement only lasted 5 years. If there was to be a new effort in ABM treaty, I think you'd still have to address the American concern that ABM systems are being deployed to protect against regional threats, particularly North Korea and Iran. So you have to keep that in mind in resurrecting the idea of a new ABM treaty in context with a new post-New START treaty. Was that clear?
Yeah, thank you for letting us know. I appreciate that point.
All right, if there's no other questions, thank you, technical group, and we'll move on to the recommendations group.
I actually had one quick question if there's still time.
Yep, go right ahead.
I was just curious about Russia's new technology. They're developing like a scramjet hypersonic missile that can strike very quickly. I was wondering if they had considered that weapon as in terms of the New START Treaty, if it would be included or if we would have to expand the treaty to include against weapons such as that.
Yes.
So the treaty would have to be, oh, sorry, go for it, Richie.
So as Tatiana mentioned a little bit earlier, Poon mentioned that it would be easily included into the treaty. So should be
There would
okay
be
with it.
like an exception for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because weapons like that often they blur the lines between these different traditional categories we have.
Right.
Yeah. For instance, there's also some information came out about a nuclear powered cruise missile that would certainly have a further range than your average cruise missile.
Right.
So
Gotcha.
it would put it into a different kind of categorization.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, thank you. Recommendation team, go ahead.
Hello everyone. We are the recommendation group. Here is our update. Next slide, please.
Identify yourself before speaking.
This is Chai Padetti speaking. I'm going to be talking about the goals of our group. Essentially, what our group is focused on is to pretty much bring together the context in which the other groups are come up with their own ideas and own recommendation. We're not trying to use their recommendation necessarily. What we're trying to do is take the context in which they argue, debate within themselves, and bring that into our own group so we can argue and debate and synthesize a coherent, harmonious recommendation on whether to start, whether to have a new START treaty. We're going to evaluate each group's information, their sources, and just general ideas on if they think they should call for renewal, replacement of the START treaty based on what information they have provided. And in the end, we're going to make our final policy recommendation based on other groups' context that they provide for us. Next slide. I was supposed to say next slide a while ago. I said all this stuff. Okay.
This is Haley Williams. So we're wrapping up phase 3 and working on phase 4 of our work plan. Progress for us looks a little different from the other groups. And if it's been possible, each of us has been attending the group meetings of those that we're working with. For some groups that hasn't been possible, so we've been coordinating with the logistics team to see how we can get the information that we need from everyone. Together as a team, we've discussed the progress of our individual groups and shared the highlights of their findings and established the structure of our recommendation and have begun writing. So since different groups are at different stages, it's now is the time for us to be working hard to pull together our final recommendation. Next slide.
Oh, sorry, I was totally muted. Hi, I'm Clara Alivasatos. So I'm the historical team point person. And as the historical team presented, their goal is basically to provide some historical perspective on the US and Soviet Union, or the US and Russia and nuclear treaties, to inform on a decision about New START. And as they mentioned, their conclusions are to ideally create an updated New START to account for some of the technological developments that have been applied to nuclear weapons. However, their point is that history has sort of shown that the time to put in place an updated version of the treaty may be quite lengthy and is often complicated by external factors. So it might be more prudent to extend New START for now while thinking about creating a more updated version. And our plan with the information from the historical team is to work that into our background and to really set the stage a bit in our recommendation, and then to tie what they recommend back into our conclusions.
Excuse me, this is Michael Nacht again. In the course of these findings, maybe you said it and I missed it, but is there a group that's looking specifically at the consequences and implications of the termination of the treaty without any follow-on, which would be starting in February 2021, an era in which there's no arms control limitations on any US and Russian strategic forces for the first time in 40 years? Is that being looked at specifically?
I don't know. From the historical team perspective, I would say no. I don't know if the other team members want to chime in on this one.
So on the next slide, or the next couple of slides, I have an outline of what our recommendation is so far. So we are planning on taking a look at kind of all the scenarios. So one of the things we are planning on looking at is extending versus allowing a lapse. So we do plan to take a look at that, but as far as what the other groups have done research on and what information we can feed into those sections, I don't have a clear grasp on yet.
Kaylee, we could just go to those slides, I guess.
Yeah.
And kind of present that information first.
Yeah, I can say that the economic diplomatic team has been considering that. I think it depends on the approach between each of the groups, the information that we're picking up on. But yeah, Kaylee will explain that is part of our evaluation.
Right. So as far as writing a recommendation, we were provided, I'd say, these three key questions that we can kind of focus on to make sure that we're at least off to a good start on looking at all the things that are involved in this. So how can the treaty be renewed bilaterally between the US and Russia? How can the treaty be expanded to include additional parties such as China? How might the US proceed if the treaty is allowed to lapse before a replacement is created? So we are seeking to definitely answer these questions and any other questions that may arise. And as the other teams presented today, it seems like most groups are converging upon the recommendation of extending and renegotiating a bilateral treaty. However, we do still need to address the other possibilities in our recommendation write-up. So this is just a screen cap from one section of the document that we've written up so far. So this isn't necessarily our final outline for what we're going to do, but so far we've roughly planned on having a section where we talk about what a new bilateral treaty would look like. So when we renegotiate a new treaty with Russia, regardless of if the treaty's been extended or not, what new things will we try to address in this new bilateral treaty? We also want to take a look at a new multilateral treaty. So if we were to include China in the treaty, what would that look like? Then we're also going to look at allowing a lapse specifically. So this is what you're asking about, I guess, Michael. So what will happen if we allow a lapse in the remaining arms control agreement between us and Russia? And then I guess the last two are, I guess, the status quo, extending the current treaty we have, don't worry about negotiating a new one, and then just getting rid of arms control completely.
So basically, we still need some things from other teams. So our job really has been to work with the other groups. Each group has a point person on our team, and to sort of come together and like with that information, and then we're going to make our own recommendation as a team. And I think one of the big things right now that a few of our groups are lacking are sources. Like we have some drafts and other written products from groups, but we don't really have a lot of their sources, and that's kind of an important one. So if you guys could all get that to us, that would be really great. And then, yeah, I think each team is or not each team, but some teams are sort of missing some information that we are going to in the future be asking for a lot of now, since we're kind of coming down to the wire. And like, as Kaylee said, we have specific things we need in order to make our recommendation. So we are going to be reaching out with a lot more pinpointed questions. And I think we'd really appreciate it if there was a little bit more rapid speed, I guess, in getting those answers back to us. So please be responsive. And I totally understand this is a really hard time of the semester, but a good responsive time would be appreciated. And then I guess based on Professor Knox's comment, it might be useful if all the teams kind of look into more of the consequences of not extending at all, because I know that there are a few groups that haven't thought that through. So that would be helpful for us as well. Next slide. I think that might be it. Yeah, so thanks. Any questions?
Hello, I'm Richie from the technical team. For the sources, do you want them in any specific format? I've been writing my paper in Chicago, but I don't mind swapping to whatever.
I mean, the style doesn't really matter. I think, I mean, it'd be nice to not get a link and to get like an actually properly cited source, but I don't think the citation style matters.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that, in-text citations, are they going to be required?
I think that's a question for the logistics team.
Yes, please do include in-text citations
And
from
Austin,
the teaching team.
what format would you like citations in?
Mansook or Michael, do you have a preference on those? I'll defer to you.
You mean whether they should be footnotes at the end of a page or at the end of the chapter or something?
Yeah,
Like
do on
APA.
Chicago style or APA MLA. Do we have a preference?
I don't really care. I think maybe just put them all at the end of the document. I don't know which label that is. Is that clear?
Yeah.
So just to be clarified, let's use Chicago 17th version and use a footnote and then references at the end of the year report.
Okay.
Thanks, Mansook.
Is it clear? Any reservations and any other ideas about the Aiden?
I think that works.
Actually, Aiden is going to work on this, so we may hear Aiden's idea and his preference.
I'm logistics team as well. That sounds
Oh, yeah.
good.
Okay, yeah. Okay, let's repeat. Chicago 17th version and footnote and references at the end of the report.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for the recommendation team?
I think I have a question. I think it's probably for the logistics team. So we're currently working in Overleaf, and I talked to Aiden about this, but as far as us putting in-text citations into our paper, it would be easiest for us to get them from people in BibTeX format, but as long as you just provide, I guess, like enough information about the source, we can probably look that up and generate that on our own. But I guess like my question for Jessica is that might be a little bit complicated for you to append all of the documents together. So I don't know, like, I guess, like, how do you feel about us using Overleaf? I can add you to the document and everything, but it might end up being like better for us to just go ahead and copy and paste things into a Word document.
That's a great question. We're going to go over that in our presentation. We are actually planning on using Overleaf, so that would be really helpful if you could already have some of your sources in BibTeX format.
Okay, awesome.
What if, for Jessica, what if we all accessed the Overleaf and then added the sources to our sections that we wrote the proper way in BibTeX? That way you guys don't have to try to go through and figure out what citations go where. And we just all...
That would be great. Yeah, we'll give each team access to the Overleaf account. We won't make it mandatory for everybody to put it in BibTeX format, just because I know not everybody knows how to use LaTeX. But if you do know how to use LaTeX, then that would be really helpful.
Okay, cool.
All right, if there aren't any more questions for the recommendation team, we can go on to the logistics team now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great day, especially during everything that's currently happening. This is the final update from the logistics team. What we've been up to is we've had a pretty nice, pretty good response rate. Been very happy with it. Team Slack page that all the group representatives have been a part of. We've been getting updates from each group. We've been able to speak and sit in with a couple of the groups to go over some of our requirements and to ensure that basically everything is staying on track. It looks like so far, based on everything we've seen, that everything will wrap up roughly when it needs to. And it seems like this project's actually moved along at just the pace it needed. So once again, I'd like to thank every single person here for the effort they've put in to ensure that this is done, especially during this current time period. And with that, I'll turn it over to my fellow member, Jessica.
Hi, this is Jessica Elder. So I'm sure you guys are all aware the paper is due in 2 weeks. So we are asking every team to please have their work done a week from today, which will give the logistics team exactly 1 week to compile everything into one cohesive report. So we'll be editing everything, and as well as writing an abstract, intro, conclusion, anything we deem necessary. So let us know if you foresee an issue with the 1 week from today deadline for your paper. We will give the recommendation team a little bit of flexibility with that because we know that their work requires other people's work. So if you guys, the recommendation team takes a little bit longer than a week from today, that's okay. But within reasonable time frame. And then wrapping up, we'll also be sending out a Google survey to all the teams, asking each teammate about team dynamics, individual contribution levels of each teammate, overall experience, and just some general feedback. So like Aiden said, we've been really pleased with everybody's flexibility and work that they've been putting in. So thanks for that. Any questions?
This is Michael Knock. Just let me add that what we normally do is the day of the presentation, which would be May 11th, you guys will present. Maybe Professor Van Bibber and I might have a few introductory comments, very brief. Then you guys present. And then normally, and these are abnormal times, we then have like a social hour with pizza and soft drinks and chatting. We've had people like Jasmina Vucic and Bethany Goldblum from nuclear engineering and other folks from different departments. We invite sort of the campus community that's interested in this topic to attend. And it's varied. Sometimes we get 1 or 2, sometimes we get many more. What will happen with Zoom, I have no idea, but I think it's unlikely we're going to be swamped with additional people. So I just wanted to let you know that that's the normal procedure. Because then by 3:30 or so on May 11th, that will end the course. Okay, any questions about that? Okay.
Sorry?
Back to Boston.
I have a question on the final presentation. Is it going to take the whole slot of time, and do we need to have a shared document with every group's input on that, or we can present like today, team by team?
You can present in a way similar to what you did today, but we want the final report, the complete integrated final report, submitted to us at the end of the hour on May 11th.
Yeah, sure. I meant for PowerPoint presentations to go alongside the report in case they're needed.
Yeah,
Do you need
it's
that?
fine.
Okay.
Sure, that would be great.
Thank you.
Yeah, whatever can be completed before before we start working on it would be amazing. Anything you guys do helps us make sure that we can make this more cohesive and straightforward. So anything that you guys are able to accomplish beforehand, that we greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, Aidan, maybe if you guys have some suggestions on a template to use for the final presentation, that would be very helpful, so that you don't have as much work to merge all different styles.
Oh, that's a wonderful suggestion. I'll write that down and we'll get that back to you probably in a day or two.
Thanks.
Any more questions for the logistics team? If not, I just have one general comment for everybody. I made a discussion on B courses. Please upload your slides you just presented there. That way everybody has them available. Other than that, Michael, do you have any concluding comments, or Mansuk?
No, I think, you guys have done a lot of work. I think it's coming together nicely. A few points that we've raised, you can include in the next iteration. We'll also report to Professor Van Bibber about what we've heard and learned today. And I know these are crazy times, but just keep it up. You're almost at the finish line.
Well, looking at the clock, it looks like we ate up all of the time. So, Michael, if it's okay with you, I'd be happy to just end the class here rather than having to break up into group works, because there's not much point for the 5 remaining minutes of class.
Sure, fine. Very reasonable.
All right, then. Thank you, everybody, for your updates. Good work. Please reach out to the teaching team if you have any questions or any issues going forward with the rest of this project.
Okay, we'll see you all on Wednesday.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.